Hey there, it's Alan, and I've got a rather advanced topic for you here. This is a follow-on to a coaching call I had at the end of last week with one of my clients, and we were discussing how to do conditional logic inside of message templates. And we ran out of time on the call. I thought I'd just put this together in a video in case there are other people out there who are curious about this, how to get this done. So this is a pretty advanced topic. The question is, if I have a message template that's going out and I want to maybe present a certain block of text based on the value of a given field. So let's say I've got a field. If that field has value A, then print this block of text. And if it doesn't have that value, then don't print anything. Let's take a look at this. We have two contributions here, and if we look at these two contributions, we see that they have this custom field here called how long have you been a donor. This is a contribution custom field for the contribution itself. So for this contribution, the answer is less than 1 year. But for this other contribution, the answer is blank. This question has not been answered for that contribution. So let's say we're going to create thank you letters. And we're going to use this thank you letter template here. And here's that field. How long have you been? Let's see how long. There it is. And we'll say something like, we see you've been a donor for. Right? This is great. Very nice. But then when we preview, we'll take a look at this message template. And for the first one, it says we see you've been a donor for less than 1 year. That's fine. But here it says we see you've been a donor for empty space because that field hasn't been filled in for that contribution. So this message here, this bit of text, really probably shouldn't be printed. It doesn't make sense. So what we'd like to do is to have a way to say if it is empty, right, it's not been answered, then we don't say anything, or we'll say we're glad to have you. There we go. But if it's not empty, we'll say we see you've been a donor for this many years, right? Now, let me make this a little bigger. What I've done here is sort of type something that you'll notice it starts to look like some kind of programming code. We're typing in some sort of computer instructions. I'm using curly brackets here. These are not square brackets and they're not parentheses, but they are these curly brackets, which are the same that you have for CiviCRM tokens. And I'm doing something like if some value, whatever that means, is empty, that is an empty string, doesn't have any length to it, then we print this. And then here's this curly brackets curly brackets else, and then some text. And then something like curly brackets with a / if, or let's say close the if statement. If you're familiar with HTML, then you may see where you have an opening paragraph, something like this, paragraph, and then some stuff, and then closing the paragraph with this / marker. So this is very similar. We're closing the if statement to say, we're done with this conditional block. So you can see we're doing something that looks like computer code. It looks like programming code of some kind. And the question then is, what is this stuff and what's the right way to write it? Well, it turns out that CiviCRM does use a templating engine that is a conditional logic parser called Smarty, the Smarty templating engine. And for most uses, it's disabled. CiviCRM uses it in lots of places that you never have to think about, but in most cases, it's not available in your message templates. But there's one place where you can see it being used in message templates. If we go to Administer, Communications, Message Templates, and I open this in a new tab, then we see for these message templates, user-driven messages, like our Thank You Letter 1 message template, by default, CiviCRM does not do any parsing of instructions for the Smarty templating language. in these message templates. But if you look at the system workflow messages, you will see, let's look at invoice for example, you will see lots of stuff that looks very similar to the kind of code we were just typing that is going to be used by Smarty. So here is an if block with some sort of variable name. We don't really need to know what this is. And then the close of the if block, right? And here's another if there's a variable like this, then do this stuff, and then close the if block. Stop thinking about the if. And so these message templates that are system workflow messages already are being parsed for Smarty templating instructions. But our user-driven messages, like our thank you letter 1, are not being parsed. And also any information that gets put into the document body or the body field of a mailing is also by default not parsed for Smarty templating rules. However, there's a way to do that, and in this video we're going to enable that and we're going to make it work. The way to do that is in your CiviCRM.settings.php file, and if you know where that is, that's great. If you don't, you can probably figure it out with a little bit of Googling, or shoot me an email and I'll explain it to you. But here is the CiviCRM settings file for this website, this sample website that we're working with. And there's a ton of stuff in here, lots and lots of stuff, but the one we're really interested in is this setting called CiviCRM Mail Smarty. So that is, you can see from the comment here, enable this constant if you want to send your mail through the Smarty templating engine, which of course we do. So I'm going to change this right now. It is set to 0 by default. Yours is also probably set to 0. Which is equivalent to false, or hey, no, don't use the Smarty templating engine. But we're going to change it to 1, which is roughly equivalent to true, or yes, do parse everything through the Smarty templating engine. We'll save that change. So that's going to allow us to have all of our email bodies whenever we're sending mail or generating these message templates, generating these thank you letters, to have that stuff run through the Smarty templating engine and processed for these kind of conditional blocks. Now, I will tell you, what I've written here is not quite right for Smarty. If we ran this just like it was, we'd get some errors because the syntax isn't right. I've just written it in a way that I think sort of describes the purpose, which is, again, if this custom field is empty, if it has no value, then just say we're glad to have you. But if it is not empty, that is, if it has a value, then put this. We see you've been a donor for this many years. So what is the right syntax? Well, in order to know the right syntax, we probably want to check the documentation for Smarty, which is available at smarty.net. Now, I've already got the if-else documentation here, but let me just, so you can find it yourself, you can always go to smarty.net, hit documentation, and I recommend choosing the Smarty 3 documentation. And then to get to the if-else, there are ways to get there, but what I'm going to say is go to functions, and then built-in functions, and then look for if-else. And so this explains how the if-else works. There are some examples down here. You'll notice here, if name EQ. What is this EQ? Well, it's up here. EQ. Also double equals. Either one of these would work. Meaning equals. So if name equals Fred, then write this. Or if name equals Wilma, then write this. Or finally, if neither of those is true, then just write this. And then finally, stop thinking about the if condition. You'll see here it uses EQ, and here it uses the double equals, and it tells you these are the same. They're equivalent. So what we've written is if, here we go, is empty. Well, is empty is kind of, there's not really one that we could use here to specify is empty. But we could use equals to, what is this? Equals Fred? No, equals an empty set of quotation marks. So I could do this. Equals 2 quotation marks, right? And I could use the single quotation mark twice, or I could use the double quotation mark twice. As long as there's nothing in between, that means it's an empty string. It's an empty value. So if contribution custom 6 is equal to an empty value, then print this. Otherwise, print this, and then stop thinking about the if condition. That's what this closing if is. We're getting very close. One important difference, though, is I've still got this to say, it's still written as contribution custom 6. And that's a problem, because if you look at the documentation here, Smarty uses some sort of $ variable name. And how it's doing that here, $amount, $name. So it's expecting a $sign followed by some identifier of a variable. And if you want to get into programming more, we can talk about what variables are and how they work. But I think it's enough for me to just say here, value. Whatever the value is. Now, I'll admit there's nothing here that I've written yet that specifies what value even is. But we'll get to that in a moment. But this is Smarty, valid Smarty syntax. If value is equal to an empty string, then print this. Otherwise, print this, and then stop thinking about the if condition. So that's how an if block works according to the documentation here. So we're halfway there. That is, we've got the logic. The part we haven't done yet is specify what's stored in this variable. We wanted it to have contribution custom 6, but we don't have a way yet to have contribution custom 6 be directly evaluated here by Smarty. So this is where we're going to use one other Smarty concept, which is a function called capture. This is the value that we want to test, and if we can somehow store this value into this variable, then we can test it. Well, that's what the capture function does for us. Capture, and then we're going to close capture. And there is one more thing we need. If we check the documentation for the capture function, then here, assign the variable name where to assign the captured output. So assign equals value. So what this is saying to Smarty is, hey, we're going to start capturing stuff, and we're going to store it in a variable called value. And you can see that's the name of the variable that we want to store it in. And what are we going to store in there? Well, it's everything between this starting capture specifier and this ending capture specifier, which you can see has that closing slash or forward slash to close. And what's between the beginning capture specifier and the closing capture specifier? It is our token. So that is going to be the value of the custom 6 custom field, or our how long field here. So what this means is we expect then this is going to store the value of the custom field in a variable named value, and then this if section is going to test the value of that variable. And if it's empty, glad to have you. Otherwise, we can see you've been a donor for this long. Okay. So I'm going to run this, and I'm curious to see if we get any errors. It does happen sometimes. So I'm going to hit preview, and we'll see what happens. Okay, I did not get an error. I am able to download a PDF file. Okay, so for the first one, it says we see you've been a donor for less than 1 year. And for the second one, it says we're glad to have you. And that's exactly what we asked for in our in our conditional logic here. We decided to store the value of our custom field in a variable. Then we tested the value of that variable and told it to print different contents based on the value of that variable. So if I want to preserve this, as we know, I can just choose update template, preview again, and now I've done that. So As I said, this is pretty complex. This is once you get into this, you are programming. You will see that if for some reason, let's say that I didn't use the $sign there and I try to preview, I'm going to get a fatal error, right? That will happen from time to time when you're doing stuff. So you want to be sure that you're testing and making sure that everything works as you expect. Little things like a missing curly bracket or a missing $sign or a test operator here that is actually not valid will get you these fatal errors, and you will want to periodically check out the Smarty documentation. You may also want to take a look at the message templates, the system workflow message templates, where lots of Smarty code has already been written, so that you can get examples of Smarty code that you might begin to understand how it's being used and how you could use similar mechanisms or similar concepts in your own templates. So the answer is, to get conditional logic in your message templates, you need to enable the Smarty templating engine by setting CiviCRM mail Smarty to 1 in your CiviCRM settings.php file. And then you need to write Smarty code in your message template. And again, the Smarty syntax is available at smarty.net under documentation for version 3. Okay? Hit me up if you have any questions. I'm sure you will, but hopefully this gets you something that you can use. And of course, the good thing is, once you have something that works, you should expect it to continue to work, because these are message templates that are reusable, so you don't have to keep editing these all the time and wrestling with complex Smarty syntax every time. But that's what it is. As I said, it's pretty advanced, so good luck, and hit me up if you have any questions. Thanks.